Good. Okay, I'll start admitting people.
Okay. Did you have fun in the waiting room?
I didn't actually. I was waiting to. Yeah, there was nobody else in there.
We weren't sure whether you could talk to each other in the waiting room, but
There were quite a few of you in there, but you probably couldn't see each other.
yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, I see. Okay.
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Oh,
We're just
great.
letting everybody in one by one, and then Linda will introduce Salim in a minute.
Brilliant. Excellent. So, how's everybody's day been?
All right. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I've been in front of the computer most of the day, so I went out for a little walk, just before this, and I just thought, this is crazy, because there were quite a few other people going out for a walk. It's dark, it's raining, it's windy. Like, at what other time would you look out of the window and think, oh yes, this is the moment to go for a walk?
Go for a walk.
It's just like, no. But strange times.
Yeah.
Hello, baby.
Oh, hi, Kathy. Nice to see you.
Hello.
How are you now, Alice?
Hello.
I'm all right. A bit broken, but getting better slowly. Thank you.
Not so painful.
Not so painful. Getting better all the time. Thanks.
Oh, good.
Hi, Barbara.
Hello. Hi. Hello, Alice.
Great. Oh,
Oh.
oh, that's better. Excellent.
Oh, darling.
Oh, yeah, thick and fast.
Yeah.
Oh,
Lovely.
I've already opened it.
yeah, that's it.
They've got them
Hi,
there.
Sylvia.
I know you're there.
So I've missed, Alice, what you've done. You've broken something, have you?
I've broken my humerus, but I'm regaining my sense of humerus.
Oh, lovely.
Right.
Yeah.
We're all going to get smaller and smaller. I think we've got
Yeah.
over 50 people who've signed up and don't tend all to turn up, do they? But yes, you were dominating the screen and now you...
It's 2 minutes before 1:30, so
Yes.
I'll leave it to you, Linda, whenever you want to kick off. And
Yeah, well, I think if it's all right with you, Salim, if we give it a little bit of time.
Yeah, of course,
Otherwise we have this,
please.
ringing in.
Yeah.
Hi, Dikra.
hello.
Nice. Sarah.
Hello.
Hi, Sarah.
I've just done it without camera because I'm assuming that's what we're doing.
Well, I think we'd rather camera but not microphone when we come
Oh,
to
really?
it.
Oh, right. I thought you didn't. I thought we were going to have it either.
Well, we'll see how the connection goes. We might have to switch off camera if it all goes a bit fuzzy. But
Right.
I think it's nicer to see who you're talking to.
Right, I haven't done my
I
hair.
know. Hello, Sarah. I've seen you for
Hello.
ages. Yeah.
Hello, Kathy.
Ah,
Yeah.
brilliant.
Helen, is that something that? Oh God, I haven't got it.
Oh, yeah.
How many have we got, Alice?
We've got 26, 27 at the moment, so about halfway, half as many as we're expecting.
Okay, we'll give another few minutes. It's only just past, and it often takes a while, doesn't it? You launch the thing and it whizzes round on you for a few minutes. So. Yeah.
I've never heard the thing of a little bell each time someone appears.
Yes. Yes.
And can that be turned off, do you think? Because if people come,
Come in.
oh, does it? Yeah,
Idea.
it might go throughout the meeting.
If I knew how to switch it off, I would.
Oh, yeah, it's you operating it, Alice. Is it? Oh, okay. I don't know what that is. Doorbell.
I can turn my volume down and see if that works.
We'll have to wait for the next person to join us, won't we? Yeah.
No, that doesn't work. I can't hear you.
All right.
Okay, well, we'll definitely give a few more minutes for people to arrive. Otherwise, it's going to be well.
We're up to 29,
Okay.
but we're only 1 minute past.
Yes.
And
yeah.
I'm getting messages with people that haven't got the link. So if I disappear for a minute, I'm sending links to people.
Brilliant. Hi, Pat. Christine, sorry.
Hi,
Confused
hello.
me.
Hi,
Confused me, yes.
hi.
Brilliant. Oh, hi, Charlotte.
Alice, it does say you can disable a chime.
Oh, how do I do it?
So you go to settings
Hang on.
and scroll down until you see the option sound notification and you toggle that off.
Thank you. I will be searching for that.
Quite quick, Alice.
Sorry. Where is that? Oh, audio settings.
Yes. Because
Kathy.
yes.
So in audio settings, where is it?
Well, it just says select settings from the menu. I don't know, presumably, I don't know if it is audio, but you just scroll down until you see the option sound notification, and you can toggle that on or off. So if you toggle that off, so have you got?
We're up to 35 people, by the way.
Okay, well, I'll start at. If we start at 25 too, so we've got another 2 minutes.
Sorry, I am trying to find this. If anyone can point me.
Yes, I think.
Settings general.
Go to settings and then just scroll down the menu and see if there's something that should say sound notification.
Hang on, I've got to answer some messages coming in.
Yeah.
I can't find it, sorry.
And it sounds like there's another way as well. If you go to the bottom of the participants list,
Okay.
manage participants, and you can toggle the play chime on and off.
Thank you.
That's my clever daughter.
Oh, thank you, daughter.
It might work. I don't know.
I can't see you. You're there somewhere.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. Yeah.
Play, join and leave sound. Would that be it? Don't play, join and leave sound. Okay, I think I found it.
Okay. Yes, worse if there's a banging of the door for people who leave.
We're up to 36.
Okay, 36, and it's 1935. So especially now that we've silenced the entry doorbell, then I think we can probably get started. So Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our talk this evening on Islam and mental health that Dr. Salim Razak has very kindly offered to deliver for us. It's brilliant that so many people have signed up. It's fantastic, and I think especially at this time we really wanted to kind of reach out to the membership and our sort of everybody involved and supporters to just keep in touch really with BWR and kind of what we're up to and so on. Just thought this would be a really interesting topic for people. I'm Linda, for those of you who don't know me. I'm one of the management committee, so I've got the great pleasure of chairing this evening. Expecting to be talking for about an hour. I was going to say a few words about the work of BWR, but really seeing everybody who's arriving, you're pretty much all already involved as volunteers or befrienders or Julian House, so I won't waste time on that. You can look it up on Facebook or our website if you don't know about us. Salim's going to sort of do the talk in sort of two parts, and there'll be a break at one point for questions, and then sort of move on to the second bit and questions again. So I think, Salim, you want this to be sort of quite interactive if possible,
yeah.
Which is yeah, brilliant.
Please.
But with so many of us, I think it makes sense if we could kind of keep on mute and if people could raise their questions through the chat. But if you direct them at Alice, and then Alice will just kind of sift through and pass them on to me. I know it sounds a bit convoluted, but I think it's going to get a bit crazy if there's all these hundreds of questions up there. So say if we can stay on mute, so I don't have to channel my inner Jackie Weaver, that'd be great. But I think it's nice if we can have the pictures up so Salim can see who is talking to. I think one of the reasons we really wanted to think about this topic is certainly for me, I think the people that we're working with, the refugees, asylum seekers, when we meet them, that is with their identity and in their kind of cultural context as refugees. And in the sort of context of all the the things that might have happened to them or the trauma they might have experienced, and I think we're always wanting to remind ourselves that however kind of significant and impactful those experiences are, actually people's identities, people's cultural contexts are much broader, much deeper than the events that have turned them into refugees, that may only have been however significant a time, but a small proportion of their sort of whole life and their whole kind of experience and their background. So it feels important to be broadening the way that we think about the people that we're meeting and spending time with and supporting in the different ways that we do. And I know this is an area that Salim has given a lot of thought to, sort of the psychiatry, Islam, mental health sort of topic really. And I have had the pleasure of working alongside Salim for some years now, off and on. So I know that we are in for a very interesting evening, very stimulating and thought-provoking talk. So I think I will just stop talking myself and just hand over to Salim.
Thanks. Thank you, Linda, and thanks, Alice, as well, and both of you for inviting me. And great to see such a big audience. Amazing. I didn't expect that, but it's fantastic. So just to let you know a little bit about myself. So my name's Salim. I'm a psychiatrist, and I've been working in the NHS, I don't know, for about 20 years now. And I come from a Muslim background. My family originally from South India, from Kerala. And I put this talk together a few years ago, really for a group, because I used to go to a lunchtime meeting of various people working in mental health, mainly psychiatrists, and people give different presentations. And someone was giving a talk actually about a gentleman from a Somali background. And someone from the audience said, "Oh, well, Muslim people don't believe in mental illness." And I thought, well, that isn't really true. I made some reply, and somebody scoffed at me in the audience, and I thought, well, this sort of so some issue here, and so I put together a little talk, kind of partly based on a little bit of a few interesting things and a few bits and pieces that I read about. What I should say is that I'm not an expert on Islam by any, by any measure. I don't have any kind of teaching or background in that respect. I suppose as a psychiatrist, I do know a little bit about mental health, but again, that's in a very specific area. And so I tried to put this talk together. Before I start, is it probably useful for me to know if there's anyone in the audience who speaks Arabic or reads Arabic? There's a reaction button at the bottom. So, okay, I can see one person waving. And is there anyone who's Muslim or from a Muslim background? Okay, and I can't see any, and I can see one person waving as well. Okay, so most people not. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly, Dikra. Please feel free to correct my Arabic pronunciation. Like I said, I'm not Arabic speaking or reading, but I'll try my best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a few things. So it's kind of three main themes of the talk. The first is just kind of the basics about some basic things about what is Islam, and then I'm going to tell you about three early Muslim scholars who wrote about health. Partly I put that part in the talk to kind of dispel this idea that there's a tradition or that Islam traditionally doesn't believe in mental illness or thinks of it as something about demonic possession or something like that. So it was partly to dispel that idea. So there's kind of three historical people. I'll take a pause then, and then we can take some questions. So if there's any questions about what I've covered so far, anything about the religion itself, I'll do my best to answer it. Like I said, it will partly be off the back of my own reading and what I may or may not know about. But please feel free to ask, anything that you're curious about that maybe you haven't felt free to ask about before, or I've got a reasonably thick skin as a psychiatrist. Then for the second part of the talk, I'm going to talk about a few, I guess, just kind of cultural things or issues around customs that might be useful for you to know if you're working with somebody who's Muslim or from a Muslim background. So it might just be relevant if you're working with a family. So that's my talk. I'm going to see if we can get up these slides. Just a second. Share screen. Right. I can only see Linda and Alice and but can you all see that? Okay, great. So like I said, I termed this Islam and psychiatry because I was talking to mainly a group of psychiatrists, but it's not loads about psychiatry really, and part of it is just about the religion itself. I put this slide up first because this word, the word that you can see written in Arabic on the slide was the first word of the Quran, and I just found it interesting. What was the first word of the Quran, as in by revelation? The Quran was kind of revealed, and what was the first revealed word, which was this in Arabic, Iqra, which means read. So it's a common theme throughout the faith and kind of Muslim development, this great drive to seek out knowledge and seek out learning. And so that was the first word of the Quran to be revealed, was read. Again, when I first put this talk together, it was mainly to an audience in Bristol. So I put this photo up, but Bath is not that far away. But I like this photo because it's so typically Bristolian. You've got the picture, you've got the skyline of Totterdown with all those colourful houses, and in the midst of it, you have this mosque, Totterdown Mosque, or Totterdown Jamia Masjid. It was originally St. Catherine's Church. It was an Anglican church, and it became disused in the late 50s to 60s. And in 1968 opened up as the first mosque in Bristol. So that's now some time ago. So it's fairly established, you know, a Muslim community in Bristol. And Bristol, and I think this is true of Bath as well, or certainly the Southwest in general, has about 5% of the population that is Muslim, which is about the same for the UK as a whole. Is about 5% Muslim. So you know, significant population. This slide shows you where Muslim people come from in the world, sort of shows you where Muslim people come from in the world. The countries that are coloured in green, don't worry about the shades of green, you don't have to get that complicated. But the countries that are coloured in green are countries that have over 20% Muslim populations. So you can see it's quite a broad area, you know, it's from parts of Europe going across into parts of China and the Far East, going across into Africa. So it's quite a broad range of countries. About 25% of the global population is Muslim, and there are over 50 countries in the world that have a majority Muslim population. Despite that, the largest group of Muslim people come from countries where they are an ethnic minority themselves, which is myself included. So in India, although you can see the kind of green shading around India, that means over 20%, it's still the Muslim people are a sizable ethnic minority. And so it's a very common experience that people from Muslim backgrounds come from countries where even within their own country, they are an ethnic minority. Despite that broad spread of different countries, I often, on ethnic monitoring forms, when I'm asked to choose between various choices of Asian/British Asian, Indian, Muslim, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, I often tick other and write Muslim. And that's very similar to if some of the audience know Raghi Omar, who was a war correspondent for the BBC. His family were from Somalia, and he moved to England as a youngster and studied in Cheltenham and then in Oxford. And during a few years ago became quite high profile on the TV. In an interview, someone asked him, well, where are you? What's your ethnicity? I think probably trying to push him to see, well, was he going to say he was British, or was he going to say that he was Somali? And actually what he answered is, I'm part of the global Muslim community. And I think a lot of Muslim people would identify with that actually their faith background is a large part of their identity, sometimes even larger than the country they might be from. And despite this kind of very broad stretch of countries where Muslim people come from, Muslim people in general share strong common threads in terms of language, in terms of food, in terms of culture and custom. So there is a broad Muslim identity that kind of sits over all those different countries, you know, from, like I said, from Africa to China, which ethnically might be very different, but they will still share strong cultural links. This is a I wonder if people in the audience will recognize this picture. This is from this is a 125-year-old picture of the Kaaba, which is a building in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, and is the focal point of the Islamic religion. So I wanted to put this up just to say, you know, so what is Islam, and you know, what is it as a religion? So it started with in Arabia. What is now Saudi Arabia at the time was an expansive region inhabited by different tribes. It was a tribal area. So it was Arabia at the time, and in the late 6th century, so 570, the Prophet Muhammad was born. At the age of 40, when he was born, he was born as an orphan his father passed away before his birth, and his mother passed away when he was a small child. And he made some sort of living supported by his family, looking after other people's businesses, essentially. at the age of 40, he began receiving revelations and founded the Islamic religion. So it was in his later life, actually, that those revelations started. Over the next 23 years, Muslim people believe that he received revelation from the angel Gabriel, and that those revelations formed a book called the Quran, which means the recitation. So the Quran is actually, although you can buy it in a bookshop, it's an oral document, really. Although it's recorded in writing, it's really written to be. It's memorized and recited, so it's an oral document. So that happened over the next 23 years until he passed away. And Muslim scripture is in two parts, really. So the main part is that revelation that he received that formed the book, the Quran. And Muslim people believe that to be the words of God, so that they're actually the words themselves are divine, and that it's God speaking in the book. It's not a book authored by Muhammad, but it's written by God and revealed to him. So that's one part of scripture, and the other scripture is the hadith, which means the talk or the sayings or something like that. And these are the sort of recorded things that Muhammad said during his lifetime, or that he did. And those together form something called the sunnah, which means tradition. So these might be different practices that Muslim people observe. So you have these two main sources of Islamic thought, the Quran and the Hadith, and you could probably think about a third source, which is something called the Sirah. In Arabic, that means something like path or journey. When applied to a person, it means their personal journey, so their biography or their life story. So the life story of the Prophet is also recorded, and that's also a source of teaching. So what do Muslim people believe? So Islam really has, if you wanted to think of it in basic terms, there are there are 6 articles of faith. So those form the inward things that Muslim people believe. So there's 6 articles of faith, and there are 5 pillars of faith. They form the outward actions that Muslim people observe. I put up this picture as part of a view across Jerusalem, and you can see in the picture, in the middle of the picture, the wall that you can see is the Wailing Wall. Obviously, it's sacred to Jewish people. In the forefront of the picture, you can see the Church of St. Mary Magdalene, and in the background of the picture, you can see the Dome of the Rock. So these are 3 important monuments to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim people. And I put it up because Islam sees itself as a continuation of those faiths. That there was Judaism, then Christianity, and then Islam sees itself as a continuation of that same faith. So in terms of what do Muslim people believe in, those 6 articles are: the first is that that people believe in God, that a singular God, that they believe in angels, and in Islamic faith that specific angels are mentioned. So these will be very familiar to people, again, from a Judeo Christian faith. So specifically in Islam, the angel Gabriel is mentioned, the angel Raphael, the angel Michael, and Azrael. So these all of these archangels are specifically mentioned in Islam. Muslim people believe in the books of God, and again within the Quran specifically mentioned are the Torah, the book of Psalms given to David, and the Gospels, or the Gospel actually. So books, Muslim people believe in the prophets of God. So again, within the Quran, very familiar prophets mentioned of Noah, Abraham, John the Baptist, Jesus Christ, all mentioned in the Quran by name. And then Muslim people believe in Judgment Day and in predestiny. So these are 6 articles of faith that Muslim people believe in. Then, as I said, there are 5 pillars of faith. So these are the outward practices that Muslim people do that form the practice of the faith. The first, I'll try my best at the Arabic names for them. So the first is called the Shahada, which means a declaration, which is a declaration of faith, a declaration that Muslim people believe in God and that Muslim people accept the Prophet Muhammad as his messenger. The second is something called Salat, which is pray, are the prayers, but there's a slightly different view here that Muslim people have sort of two types of prayer. One called Salat, which are the sort of obligational prayers. These are 5 fixed prayers at a fixed time of day. I'll mention that a little bit later because it might be relevant if you were visiting someone at home. The third is something called Saum, which means fasting, and that's fasting during the month of Ramadan, which again I'll come to a bit later in the talk. The fourth, Zakat, which means charity, for Muslim people is an obligation that a certain percentage of their income is given as charity. It's a fixed percentage, and there's various Muslim organizations and banks that will calculate that for you. It's based on your assets and your earnings, and it's very, very complicated to calculate. Roughly about 2% of your earnings you're obliged to give to charity. And the final is Hajj, or the pilgrimage, and that's the pilgrimage to Mecca, which I showed, the picture I showed you earlier. And again, that's at a fixed time of year. It's not that it is a fixed time of year and involves a series of different rituals. Just as a case of interest, I'll just put this up once more because I just find this amazing. This picture's from 125 years ago, but obviously this is the Kaaba has a mosque built around it, which you can see some of the minarets and some of the surrounding wall. So that forms probably the holiest site in Islam. And that keeps on expanding as the Muslim population has grown. And today is a mosque, that mosque holds 4 million people, which I just find unbelievable. You can see it on Google Earth. So moving on a little bit in history. So that tells you a little bit about what do Muslim people believe and what do they do as a result of that belief. After the Prophet Muhammad passed away, Islam began to spread rapidly across the world, and it quickly spread to various different countries. The Quran at that time wasn't collected in any way. It was simply memorized by people and passed from person to person. Some people had kept written down their own personal notes or something like that as an aid memoir, but otherwise it was just memorized by people. And as Islam spread to different countries, people started to recite it slightly differently. And one of the successors, the head of the Muslim community at that time, felt that it was important to have a standardized version of the Quran that was written, that could be sent out to different communities. This was the first time it was collected as a book, and it was called the Uthmani Quran, named after Uthman, the third successor after the Prophet Muhammad. This was maybe 2 decades after his death. This is a very old copy of the Quran, certainly over 1,000 years, kept in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, once thought to be one of those original copies of the Quran. Probably not, it's probably 100 years later than that, but that still means it's over 1,000 years old. There are various kind of old copies of the Quran around the world, and some of you may know it's a few years, maybe 2 years ago, a page was found from the Quran in Birmingham University, which dates probably to the lifetime of the Prophet. So it's probably one of the original notes of someone who knew the Prophet or spent time with him. Contained within the Quran, there are lots of very interesting ideas and lots of very interesting psychological ideas, which I thought it's just interesting to think about that, particularly when you're working in mental health. So firstly, the Quran, the Islamic belief, describes something called fitra, which is like the sort of natural disposition or natural inclination of people. And it goes on to describe essentially inborn or inherent characteristics of people, such as a desire to be peaceful and have tranquility and things like that, but that being challenged by your environment and the world around you. The Quran describes something called the nafs, which is translated in lots of different ways, depending on where you read. It might be translated as soul or spirit, but the Quran describes it as something within a person, and often talks about it being the seat of people's desires, and sometimes difficult desires, very similar to how you might read the description of the ego in the kind of Freudian description of ego is very similar in some ways to how the Quran talks about the nafs. Interestingly, another word that you may have seen on the news more recently, the word jihad, usually translated to holy war in the newspapers. In the Quran, it actually translates to struggle, and in the Quran is often described as the struggle between your own desires and your duty or your want to be good or righteous or something like that. So that struggle between that desire to be good and your other desires that are pulling you in another direction, and the struggle between the two, often described as jihad. The Quran also talks about akal, which would translate to probably something like intellect, and it talks about kalb, meaning heart. So it talks about all these various different aspects of the human psyche, in a very kind of and how they interact together. Other interesting concepts: the Quran describes a duty of people to look after those with mental illnesses or those with learning disabilities. And the Quran also contains a very early description of the concept of diminished capacity for people who may be experiencing mental illness, which obviously sort of predates that idea in Western thought by many hundreds of years. So there, what would have been very new concepts and very forward-thinking concepts in the Quran. This is a picture of a school in Baghdad, and the picture's probably from somewhere like sometime around the 8th century. So this is when the Islamic community was maybe 100 years old or something like that. And the reason I put it up is because it sort of gives you a picture of how Islamic thought developed early on in Muslim history, and is a period described as a golden age in Islam. So at that time, there was a great emphasis placed on academics and on scholarly activities, but also that Islam has always been very strongly rooted in the Arabic language, partly because of where the religion originated and because of the language of the Quran. For that reason, the Arabic language is very strongly embedded throughout Islamic history. And even for myself, being from South India, or my family from South India, there's lots of words that we'll use that are Arabic in origin, and where I'm from Kerala in South India, that these are words that Muslim people would use. Kerala Hindu people wouldn't use the same words. For example, the words for prayer, the words for charity, the words for poverty, all of those, we use Arabic words. So the Arabic language is strongly embedded in Muslim culture. So early on in that development of Islamic thought, as Islam spread throughout the world, Muslim scholars came into contact with other civilizations and other schools of thought. And so there was a strong movement within Islamic academic circles called the translation movement, where people translated different texts into Arabic. Now that meant that your early Muslim scholars would have been exposed to Muslim texts, but also Greek texts, and also Chinese and Indian. So all these different schools of thought, they put together and synthesized, and this really led to an explosion in early development. And So I wanted to mention 3 people who wrote about health. Unfortunately, the first one, Abu Zaid al-Balkhi, I couldn't find a picture of him. So this is where he was from, Balkh in Central Asia. He was a scholar in the late 9th century. And he wrote he introduced the idea of spiritual health. Again, really probably thinking about mental and psychological well-being. He wrote a book called The Sustenance of Body and Soul, and he wrote a description of depression. He's credited with the first description of what in mental health we term endogenous depression. So he talked about 2 types of depression, one being as a reaction to certain events that would be treated by talking to people, and a second type of depression that was in the absence of those stressful events and would be treated with herbal remedies or physical therapy like exercise and things like that. So really that's a very early description of what we now call in mental health endogenous or biological depression. The second doctor is Muhammad Razi. In the West, he was called Rhazes, and he was again in the late 19th century. He wrote extensively about health. He wrote over 200 books about health. The World Health Organization credit him with the first description of smallpox. He set up the world's first pharmacy. He's credited with inventing the ward round concept in hospitals. He wrote lots of medical encyclopedias. He also wrote an encyclopedia that was written for laymen and then had it distributed amongst the poor to be used at home as a sort of as a home remedy, which again was in real contrast to what would have been happening in kind of Greco-Roman cultures that were where that learning was being kept in a minority of scholars to not be shared with the public. He wrote about philosophy and medical ethics, and he wrote extensively about the connection between emotional health and physical health. And the last doctor who again became very well known in the West is his full name Abu Ali al-Hasan bin Abdullah Ibn Sina, or Ibn Sina for short, or in the West called Avicenna. So Avicenna again wrote extensively about health, and the picture on the right hand side is the inside of his book, which was called the Kanun al-Tib, which he wrote just at the beginning of the 11th century. It means the canon of health. And he talked a lot about mental health in that book. It had whole chapters about mental health and about the treatment of nervous ailments. He described lots of neuroanatomy that we still, will quote today. So he described the cerebellum vermis and the caudate nucleus. He talked about the frontal lobe of the brain as being the seat of reasoning, which we still our understanding of in different types of dementia. But the really amazing thing about this book is once he finished writing it, it became the major textbook across the world, including in your big medical universities in Europe, like in Verona and Padua. And it remained the major medical textbook for the next 800 years. So it was obviously well ahead of its time. For 800 years, it didn't go out of date, which is amazing. So these were 3 early doctors in those first 300 years of Islam that really developed ideas of mental and psychological well-being, very much in contrast to that idea that that mental illness was something to do with demons or spirits, and also very much in terms of very much bringing together ideas of spiritual health and physical and emotional health. So as well as writing about science and health, they also wrote about philosophy and spirituality. I'll take a quick break there and see. I don't know what people would have made about that and if they had any questions. So shall I check with you, Linda?
Yeah, so we've had a couple already. One, a request, could you please spell out the names of the scholars? Because otherwise nobody's going to know. So you're not going to be able to try and repeat them. So I'm not sure how we do that. If you just, can you spell them out to us? Or?
Yeah, or I can probably put them in the comment box, can't I? Will people be able to see that if I do that? Yeah.
Brilliant. That's great. And then just another thought, I think, you're talking about the the importance of prayer and the timings of prayer and so on. I guess, well, do you feel we ought really to be arranging our visits and so on, with an awareness of those times?
Good question. So that's sorry, I'm just typing in some of those names. So I think probably not. Yeah, sorry. I think probably not, because so there are 5 prayers. The first is at dawn, so don't worry, you won't catch that one. It's about 5:30 at the moment in the morning. The second one is kind of roughly somewhere in the morning. The other one roughly somewhere in the afternoon. Then one at dusk and one in the middle of the night. So there's 2 that I guess you might catch. But bear in mind that the time shifts from day to day and is on a very specific time. And people who keep those 5 prayers will pray them at a specific time. There's usually like a window that you can pray them in, but you can't just pray them at any time, basically. But also, I would think overall, I don't know, people might have a different opinion on this, that prayer altogether might take 10 minutes or something like that. So I think if you tried to avoid it, it'd be too hard. You'd have to check. Most mosques, or you can get on the internet now, will give you prayer timetables, and you'll see it shift the time of each prayer, because they're linked to different times of day. So one's at daybreak, one's as the sun is ascending, one's as it's descending, one's at dusk, and one's partway through the night. So they're calculated according to the position of the sun, and so it shifts by a few minutes every day. It's a seasonal thing. So I think you'd constantly be checking, thinking, oh, okay, it might be this. Whereas I expect most people would either wait for you to finish the visit, or if you're visiting a family, they might just say, excuse me for a minute. They'd be gone about 10 minutes and come back. So I don't think I would try and do that. I think it'd be too difficult.
Okay. Somebody has suggested that there might be an app. I think that someone thinks that there is an app that you can actually get for your watch that will tell you it's prayer time now. So I guess if you
there are lots, there's lots of that's the one I use. So there's lots of apps. It'll shift the times according to where in England you're based. Now your phone does all amazing things. It knows where you are, even if you tell it or not. So it'll calculate what time of day it is where you are, wherever you are. So yes, there are. You could use that. You could use that. But.
And there's another question referring back to the scholars. Are they taught in school? I guess the question is whether they're taught in schools here, or
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I think the third person I mentioned, Ibn Sina, or Avicenna, is kind of, I guess, world history is fairly well known. But again, I don't remember ever being taught about Avicenna in school. But then I don't remember being taught much about world history in school in general. So I don't think they are. I wasn't taught about him in medical school either, which is also interesting.
I guess that is the more important point, isn't it? As you say, there are huge gaps in sort of history teaching in schools. But actually, when you're getting into the medical learning, you would.
I mean, so I think if we were thinking, globally, you could probably compare certainly Rhazes or Avicenna to somebody like Galen. You could certainly compare them to, but I don't think they would have been given the same profile. But I think historically probably a similar level of contribution.
Interesting. I guess we could debate that one for a long time, couldn't we? As to sort of why. So those are all the questions that we've got up on the chat already. So unless anybody got anything else they wanted to ask in the historical bit, to move on.
Yeah, great. Let me just put this back up. Sorry. Has that come up? I can't really tell. Good, thank you. Yeah, I did put this. I was meant to put this slide up for my little pause, but there you go. Just a very a verse from the Quran about a commonly quoted verse about meeting with other people, or about different races. So I wanted to talk something about, I guess, the culture of Islam, and I thought I would start off with a universal culture of food, and this is chicken biryani, from which is made all over India, and probably and within India is thought of as a Muslim dish, although it's made all over India. Probably originally came to India via Central Asia, or the Mughal emperors who originally came from Afghanistan and Central Asia. But I put it up because I'm always struck by this sort of commonality in terms of food, and that, you know, when I've traveled and eaten in different parts of the world, I'm always struck with, if I'm in a Muslim country, how much the food reminds my grandmother's food, you know, and has this very kind of similar take on food. But obviously food has this kind of central place in Muslim culture, as it probably does in all cultures. And some of you might have heard these words of the word halal, probably most commonly applied to meat, or halal meat. But the word halal just means allowed or permitted, or something like that. The opposite being haram, which means not permitted or forbidden, or something like that. And largely the things that are not permitted, dietary wise for Muslim people, are pork or pork products, and alcohol. I should actually, before I started all of that, I should have started off that when we talk about culture, of course, yeah, the same as for anyone from any background, there's a huge diversity within that, and even the things that people accept as being parts of the religion. Like, I don't think that there's any Muslim person that would say Islam doesn't say that you can't drink. You might get the odd person that says something like that, but I think, you know, probably everyone would accept that Islam says you're not supposed to have alcohol. But that doesn't mean that no Muslim person has alcohol, you know, and the same is true for any faith and any cultural background. You have this big diversity, but, you know, it forms part of that culture, doesn't it? So in terms of what is halal, or what's permitted, is things without alcohol and without pork products. And within that, you get probably a big range of personal practices, you know, that some people who may follow that very closely may not like you to bring alcohol into their house, for example. That's not something exclusive to Islam. There are many shops in Easton that have signs outside. There's a great vegetarian restaurant in Easton, if any of you are ever there, that says please don't bring alcohol or meat onto the premises. So the gentleman who works there is Sikh, and so he doesn't want that being brought into his shop, even though it's not for him. He'd rather that it wasn't even in your bag. So some very religious people may also have the same point of view, you know, that if you were on your way home and you had a bag with a bottle of wine on it, they would rather that you didn't bring that into their house. Some people may be very strict about the issue about pork. So you'll see, certainly I know in Bristol you can find lots of shops with halal Haribos. So because some of the products in sweets, like, well, probably the commonest gelatin, but also some of the other colorings and additives may originally be from some kind of pork products. So some people will check that very carefully in terms of ingredients, and they may even look through the list of additives. there are even some sources where you can look at different E numbers and it'll tell you which ones were were made or originally from some kind of pork product. So there's quite a range of how strictly people will follow that, but essentially, yeah, most people don't eat pork, and an awful lot of people wouldn't have alcohol, and even in terms of meat, some people may be more strict about that they may only eat halal meat, so they may not eat meat from the supermarket, for example. They would only eat from a halal butcher, and that's meat that has been or animals that have been slaughtered in a particular way in accordance with Islamic tradition. So yeah, so there's different issues about food, but quite a range. But again, it might be relevant if you were thinking about bringing a gift for somebody, if it was, if you were giving someone food or something like that. There might be some things that they do and don't eat. The very simple way, like I've often done this when I'm flying abroad, I order the halal meal. It's basically the vegetarian meal, so it's slightly different in that respect between for Muslim people and Jewish people, that the halal food doesn't need to be blessed by a priest or anything like that. It's more about how it was prepared, and for the meat, it's around principles around animal welfare and cleanliness and things like that, that's been prepared in a particular way, essentially that it doesn't have blood, so blood products as well, Muslim people wouldn't eat. But I can't think of a blood product other than porky ones, basically. So I can't think of other ones, but there probably are. Yeah. And then I'm going to use Nadia's help to smoothly segue from food into fashion, or clothing, really. Again, I wanted to put this up to think, because again, particularly how Muslim women dress has reached the news frequently in really unfortunate ways, and there's a huge, again, breadth of opinion on this. Largely, the kind of central principle within Islam is around modesty, and that's applicable to men as well as women. And so I thought to put up this picture just to partly reflect that kind of diversity. Nadia being from her family originally being from Bangladesh, the father and son on the other side, I don't know if they're famous, I just pinched the picture off Google, but they're from Nigeria. But there's a commonality there, although very different countries, quite far apart. There's a commonality that's something around modesty, and so often you'll see that within Muslim communities, you have different kind of garments that may have their own cultural story, but often long flowing garments that cover up large parts of the body, and that also are not I don't know, figure hugging or something like that. So, and again, this is true for men and for women. If you were so again, if it was for a particularly religious family, that might be something that I thought about, that I don't know, I might not go around in a t-shirt, but that would probably be true if I was going to my uncle's house as well. I think like he might give me a clip around the ear and tell me, why have you come around in your pajamas or something like that. So there's this kind of general theme of being a little bit more modest and a little bit more conservative in fashion. I expect probably most Muslim houses, not that mine is a Muslim house, but this is true of my house as well. I would ask you to take your shoes off when you come in. So that's again probably very common. And then the other thing that I should mention is something around gender. So again, there's a huge range of opinion in this respect, but I often think about my grandmother's house. In her family, their lounges often had a curtain in the middle of it. it was generally pretty crude. So someone would have just run a wire across the middle of the lounge and hung a sheet up. And normally that would just kind of sit on one side of the room. But if guests came over, they would often draw that sheet across, and the women would sit on one side and the men would sit on another. I was always a child, so I was allowed to go on either side of the curtain because children, I don't know, don't count. So I was allowed to sit on either side. I remember the women's side being very noisy with a lot of laughter, and the men's side being very serious with a lot of politics. So generally that women's side. But this is not that unusual that there would be this gender segregation in our community, and I think true of a lot of Muslim communities. The word they use for that is parda, which means curtain. So that's really from Indian communities. I think it's originally a Persian word that came into Urdu and then snuck into English. So we do use it in English, sometimes in the government. If you see a government under purdah or a particular piece of legislation under purdah, meaning covered or being kept secret or kept in privacy. So it's something about privacy. So for some people there is that gender segregation. That it might be relevant that if you're working with, for example, women may prefer not to work with a man on their own, for example, and again, that's something that there's not so uncommon in health that someone might either ask to see a female doctor or wouldn't want to see a male doctor on their own, as in a woman might ask to see a female doctor or wouldn't want to see a male doctor if they were on their own. Yeah, I think it's probably not that unusual especially for older people. This is a picture of Jumeirah Mosque in Dubai. I used to live across the road from it when I was little, and I put it up partly to think of day and night in the Islamic calendar, because you've got the nice moon up in the corner. Islam follows a lunar calendar, which means it's always out of sync with the rest of the calendar. And it has a completely separate calendar. So the date, I'm just looking at my phone. The date today, 17th December 2021, but the Islamic date 5th of Rajab 1442. So we have a completely different lunar calendar, and like I said, just to think about how the day and the week and maybe the year works for a Muslim person. So within the day you have these 5 prayer times that are pretty fixed times of the day. The first one being kind of roughly at the moment at about 5:30. The second prayer being at about 12:30, something like that. Then the third one is, I think, about 2:30. Fourth one will be at about 5:30, and the last one at about 7:30. So you've got these 5 prayers, fixed points of the day at specific times. People who observe them fully will want to pray that specific time, and again, that's something mentioned strongly in the religion, that you should pray at the allotted time, not think, oh, I missed it, I'll pray a little bit later or something like that, although you can, but it's not what people like to do. And that prayer, before the prayer, people do a particular ritual wash that will take a few minutes, and the prayer itself will maybe take about 10 minutes, something like that. So within the day you have these 5 kind of fixed points that kind of give that structure to your day. Within the week, Friday is a particularly special day for Muslim people, where we have congregational prayers, a little bit similar to Sunday in church, that kind of congregational Sunday mass. Friday, although it's that kind of congregational day, it doesn't mean that in Muslim countries things are closed or that it's thought of as being a non-working day or something like that. Islam has always struck me as a sort of working man's religion. Even on the holidays, you don't necessarily get off. You go and you do your prayer and then you get back to work. So Friday, that congregational prayer is at lunchtime. So myself included, I kind of block off about an hour of the day on a Friday. So that might be something to consider if you're working with Muslim people, that Friday around lunchtime, they might be in the mosque, or it will be particular. For a lot of people, Friday lunch again is particularly special, that they might go to the mosque for their Friday prayers, come back and have a bigger lunch if their kind of working week allows it. Again, in Muslim communities, that would be quite a communal thing. In my grandfather's house, we'd always come back from the mosque, and my grandfather would tell my grandmother, we've just gone back, we've got another 10 people who've just going to join us for lunch. And she never blinked, really. Suddenly lunch was for 25, and she just thought, okay, I don't quite know how that worked, but there you go. There are two major festivals for Muslim people. One called, they're both called Eid, so that, which means festival. If you're wishing someone happy Eid, happy Eid would be fine, I think, to any Muslim people. They'd be very happy for you to tell them happy Eid. But in Arabic, we would probably say Eid Mubarak. I don't know if Mubarak, you'd say Eid Mubarak, which means Eid blessings. And Eid, the word Eid means festival. So there are two festivals which again rotate across the year, because Islam's a lunar calendar. It shifts by about 10 days every year. So the first Eid is called Eid al-Fitr, which means the festival of sort of breaking the fast or something like that. We sometimes call it the festival of charity, and it marks the end of Ramadan. So Ramadan is a really big thing in the Muslim community. It's a month of fasting and spiritual reflection. This year it'll start somewhere in April. And like I said, every year it shifts backwards by 10 days. So you can imagine a few years ago, well, even last year, right in the thick of summer, it meant a really long day. And during that month, Muslim people will fast completely, which means they won't eat anything or drink anything from sort of daybreak, so it's sort of slightly before dawn till dusk, so well after sunset. Last year the fast started at about 3 o'clock in the morning and finished at about 8:30 or something. So in that time you don't eat anything, you don't drink anything. You're not really supposed to raise your voice, which is really difficult when you're really hungry. And you're not supposed to smoke if you're a smoker. That's pretty tough. And lots of other things that you're not supposed to do in that time. But also for that month, Muslim people spend a lot more time reflecting on their faith. Lots of people will go to the mosque every evening to break their fast, and their sort of long congregational prayers that people do. So it's really a strong month of spiritual reflection as well as fasting, and that ends with this festival of Eid. The second festival, about 70 days afterwards, is called Eid al-Adha, or the festival of sacrifice. It marks the pilgrimage to Mecca, and it commemorates the biblical story of Abraham offering his son in sacrifice. And a couple of other things, sorry, about fasting that I should have mentioned. Obviously, for people with health issues, that can be really relevant, that they may include medication in their fasting. There's a range of opinion on that, but some people will include fasting from their medication. I've slightly overrun, I know. Well, not slightly, sorry.
I was just going to say, Salim, that we've got a question on Ramadan, whether it has an effect on mental health.
Well, I'm sure it does. I'm sure it does in a range of different ways. So firstly, I suppose there's a lot of evidence on the protective factors of one, spirituality, and the second, charity, on mental health. So in that respect, probably Ramadan is strongly protective. So it's a real time of increased community cohesion, increased community activities, and then that spiritual reflection and charity. So in that respect, it's probably strongly protective. Of course, the fasting itself is a real, stress to your body psychologically as well. So you can imagine that if essentially if I told any one of you, today you're not allowed to shout or swear, But what I'll do is I'll make you really hungry, and then I'll put you at home where you've got I'm talking about myself again, 3 screaming kids. That's really, really difficult, and it's part of the challenge, you know. And I think it's part of that learning to be more calmer, more reflective, more meditative, and all of that. So I think it's a deliberate challenge to your body, but I'm sure it can be very, very stressful for people. And the other issue, of course, is around medication. So the common opinion on this is that if you're ill, well, not the common opinion, the instruction is if you're ill, you don't fast. But there's quite a range of what people would include as illness. So, you know, if you had an infection or something, I think most Muslim people would say, well, then you don't fast, you take your antibiotics, you're ill, you know, you miss those days, you make them up later, or you can give a donation to charity to make up those fasts. But people with a chronic illness may view it differently. So, for example, if they take an antidepressant, you know, they've got a history of depression, they're not depressed, but they take an antidepressant, that they might view differently. And they might think, well, okay, I'm not going to take my antidepressant whilst I'm fasting. A lot of pharmacies now will write up alternative regimes, medication regimes, to work around those fasting times. But of course, that can also have an effect on people's health. Hope that answered the
Yeah,
question.
And I'm interrupting you, but a slightly related question is whether there might be conflicts today between contemporary medical practices in the UK and the Islamic faith.
Yeah, so again, yeah, that's again, I think very, very complicated and probably quite personal. But the way I think about it is, again, I always keep coming back to my grandmother. Obviously, I had 2 of them, and I haven't mentioned which grandmother. They're different ones. So sometimes I'm talking about my dad's mum, sometimes my mum's mum. My dad's mum, if she was ill, would generally go and ask various people about that. And so she would go and consult what she'd call a Western doctor, which would be in a hospital, an outpatient clinic, or something like that. She'd go to a hospital. In India, you've got this kind of combination of welfare hospitals and private hospitals. So she'd go to a hospital that she thought was good, and she'd ask the doctor there, and she said, I've seen the Western doctor. She'd go to an Ayurvedic doctor, which has a long tradition in India of kind of a herbal medicine. So she'd go to a herbal doctor. And then she'd probably ask her priest as well, the imam in the mosque. And all 3 of them would probably give her different views of her health, you know. And so, yeah, and you would have that conflict. But to her, I don't think it ever felt like a conflict. She would just choose what made sense to her. And that might be half of one and a bit of the other, or something like that. So there wasn't, again, I think within the NHS, we certainly do this a little bit. We push people to accept one view and reject another, you know. But I think, again, in a lot of those communities, they were much more comfortable in mixing those different things, and you pick the bits that make sense to you, and you forget about the bits that don't make sense to you. And that might be a mixture of whatever your imam told you, whatever the doctor told you, whatever the healer told you. You know, you take bits and pieces and you put it all together. So I don't think it is always viewed as a conflict. Certainly within a lot of Islamic societies, science and religion are not seen as in conflict together, certainly not in the same way as they have developed in the West, where, you know, there was that drive towards science and secularism. So it isn't the same. In fact, a lot of I read that there's a research center in Iran that's doing stem cell research, and they have a priest that sits on their board to consider theological matters in their research applications. So, you know, so they're very much sometimes married together and not in conflict. Yeah. Hope that's helpful. I've only got 2 more slides, so I'll just do them quickly, and then I'm happy to hang around. It depends how long we've got, but I'm happy to hang around. This is a little picture of 3 of the last chapters of the Quran. They're very short chapters, and often people recite them when they feel in danger or to protect themselves. But I put it up just to think about, there's this real culture of memorization of the Quran. So people memorize it, and memorize it in its original Arabic, because those words are seen as, you know, sort of sacred words, and they're the revealed words. So they've been kept the same. Any Quran that you buy today in the bookshop will generally have the Arabic writing as well, which is identical to what it was 1,000 years ago. So those words are closely preserved, and people learn them in their original Arabic, myself included. So I don't speak Arabic. I wouldn't understand it if anybody said anything to me in Arabic, but I can recite these three chapters and some other bits because I've learnt them a bit like sort of parrot fashion to be able to recite them. In the Muslim prayer, there's a sort of there's an amount of the Quran that you would need to recite to be able to complete the prayer. Again, done in Arabic, not in English or in whatever your native tongue is. So there's this real tradition of memorizing the Quran, and people who have memorized large parts of the Quran are held in very, very high esteem. In fact, several millions of people across the world have memorized the entire Quran, and they use a particular title. So again, my great grandmother had memorized the entire Quran, and so she used a title before her name, Hafiza. So it's a little bit like being knighted or something. You can use a new title in front of your name once you've memorized the Quran. Often in mental health, I've often seen this happen, that in hospital wards you'll see somebody reciting the Quran and doctors rushing around thinking, gosh, he must be very ill. He's sort of using this foreign language and reciting something. So that recitation is a very common practice for Muslim people, not necessarily an indication of anything at all or some kind of increased religiosity or anything like that. It's a very common cultural practice. And last of all, this is Aladdin from the Arabian Nights. I put this up because this is where in English we get the word genie. It's an Arabic word, jinn, which is again a very common Muslim belief described in the Quran as well, that as well as mankind, there's a separate race of beings or spirits that inhabit the world, that they're generally unseen but can reveal themselves, and they're not necessarily good or bad. And I think often Muslim people in distress might think about that when trying to make sense of their own experience. So particularly if people were experiencing some issue with their mental health, like psychosis, they may the cultural framework that they use to make sense of that may often sometimes involve that spiritual belief. And I've often seen talks where people would translate that to, genie, like in Aladdin's lamp. But actually, that's where we borrowed the word from, is a very, again, universal Muslim belief that there are these spirits that inhabit the world alongside people. They could be good, they could be bad, and at times they might cause difficulties or distress to people. At times they might help people. Pretty much a universal Muslim belief. And that's the end. Salamu alaikum. May peace be upon you. And I can hang about for questions if people want to.
So we've got a few here already that people have been putting up. So one, sorry, I'm just going back to being able to read it properly. Somebody who works in a Somali community and says that the community tends to ostracize women who they feel have broken the rules, which obviously has a huge impact on mental health. The question is this following Islamic teaching, or is it just a tradition that's developed sort of within that culture? Yeah,
I mean, sadly, I don't think misogyny is something owned by the Muslim community. So I think that's a very, that's very a tradition. I would say embedded in various ways across the world, and I doubt that would be very different if we were to look at people from African communities of different faiths, whether that would be very different from the Muslim faith compared to people from a different faith background, but from the same, country or environment or something like that. So no, I don't think it's in keeping with Muslim teaching, but of course, Muslim people are from all different parts of the world that have different cultural practices.
Yes, that's interesting. It's about making sure you don't conflate the two, isn't it? Make assumptions. So another really interesting question. In asylums through the ages, certain people have manifested the belief that they're Jesus Christ. Is there a Muslim equivalent? Would anybody declare themselves?
No, I don't. Well, I don't. Not in a similar way. So I've never heard of somebody thinking that they were the Prophet Muhammad. I've never heard of that. I'm sure there must be an example, but I don't think it's a common experience. Whereas it used to be a very common description in Europe of people thinking that they were Jesus. So no, I don't think there's probably the similar equivalent would be something around possession, or something about jinn, or maybe thinking about the end of the world, or something apocalyptic like that. So there are probably some similar things, but not exactly not exactly the same.
Interesting, isn't it? There's a few more. I've been told it's impolite to look men in the eyes if you're a woman, whereas we find the opposite. Impolite. So, what's your recommendation? How we should deal with this? Are we doing, cultural integration, or are we sort of respecting where people have come from?
Yeah. So again, I mean. I suppose I can't answer for all communities, but I can think about my own experience of that. I wouldn't have. I don't have any recollection of within kind of my broader community of people thinking a woman looking straight at a man would be threatening or offensive in some way, but the opposite might be considered true. So again, when I think about in my family's houses, in India, the kind of most of my women in my family would have wore saris, so they didn't have a head covering, but that if you've seen a sari, of course, it has a part that drapes over your neck, and if a man came into the room where there were a group of women, a lot of them would just pull that bit of the scarf over their head like that, and when the man left, they'd put it back down again. So they didn't actually wear a head covering, but if a man came in, they would cover their head. And I think it probably would have been considered quite rude for the man to stare at a woman. So I think in that respect, that would be considered rude. And traditionally, again, from an Islamic teaching, that men should lower their gaze when women are present. So I think in terms of the Islamic interpretation would really be that men shouldn't stare at women. I don't think there's the same issue, or I haven't seen it described as a women staring at men, but mainly that's something about whatever, being lustful as opposed to being rude. But I think it would probably also be considered a bit aggressive. So yeah, but women making eye contact with men, I think again that's probably more a cultural thing than a culture as in a broader cultural thing as opposed to Islamic culture.
Okay. And there's another one that came up earlier. Just a comment that in strict Judaism, if someone brushes past the person who's praying, they have to start again. Is that true in Islam as well?
No. So, again, I'm sure there's a range of opinion on this, but there's lots of lovely stories of the Prophet praying and children climbing on his back and him carrying on his prayer. So I don't think religiously that would be that people would say that. No. I mean, although I suppose one thing, this is true in mosques and things, so I expect it to be true if you're in someone's house. You shouldn't walk in front of someone who's praying. So in Muslim people, when they pray, they face Mecca, so they'll have a compass, or like me on your phone now, that will pick up your location and tell you which direction Mecca is in. They'll face that direction, and so and yeah, they wouldn't want someone to walk in front of them when they were doing that. But generally, I expect if you're at someone's house, they'd go to another room or something like that. So I don't think it'd be an issue.
That's the end of the questions that have come through, unless anybody's got anything they want to quickly type in.
Or shout out, I don't mind.
Shout out, yes. Back on. That's all the questions it says there. That's all, folks. Salim, just remains really to say thank you so much. It's been
Linda,
so
Sorry, I was sorry,
Yep.
Sally and Linda and everybody. I was typing, and then I heard I could shout out. Oh, I won't
Please.
shout. Salim, I was just wondering if you had any idea whether the incidence of mental health presentations in people of Muslim faiths was similar to that of the general population or different in any way? Is there anything we know about that?
There's some things we know. Again, I don't. Yeah, so there's a few broad themes, I guess. So firstly, some of your major mental illnesses, if I think about something like schizophrenia, is fairly universal across whatever ethnic background you're from. Some other things like depression, again, generally. Strong spiritual beliefs is not something specific to Muslim culture, but any strong spiritual belief generally research-wise is protective of your mental health. I think there probably is an aspect of the routine that, you know, somebody who's closely follows Islamic practice, I'm sure there's something about that routine of the 5 prayers and the Friday and things like that that are very containing and comforting. Certainly for myself, if my partner notices if I miss 2 Friday prayers in a row, she'll notice on the 3rd week and say, "You seem a little bit more stressed. Have you been missing whatever?" You know, she's not from a Muslim background, but she will notice that. So there's something about that containment. But otherwise, the other big thing is, of course, the story of migration and kind of marginalization. So, like I said, that the majority, or yeah, I mean, it is the majority. The bigger number of Muslim people come from countries where they themselves are an ethnic minority. So, you know, where my family are from in Kerala, that Muslim community was established during the lifetime of the Prophet. So, from inception of Islam, that community was established. It's over 1,000 years old, and yet they're a discriminated minority. And there's lots of, you know, we have a particularly right-wing president in India who come out with lots of anti-Muslim legislation. So that's a very common experience for a lot of Muslim people. So that marginalization and discrimination, you know, even within their if I can use a word, their homelands, you know. But then, of course, the story of migration on top of that. So I know from my work in learning disabilities, a lot of people in the Somali community have been asking about autism and why that seems to be higher in those in their community who have migrated. And we don't know, but again, that's probably the major thing to think about in mental health, which of course you all already are, is that the experience of migration. So even aside from the experience of the trauma, that if you've come as a refugee from maybe from a war zone or from, you know, some other, you know, for some other reason, there's that experience. But actually, even the experience of migration on its own, you know, that, for example, you know, my dad came to England in the 50s. That was really for work, you know, because he wanted to do a master's. That's why he came here. But there's still the effect of migration. So he got here, he thought of England as this idyllic country, and lots of Indian people thought that England was like where they were from, you know, because of the empire. And so they thought they were coming home. And then when they came to England in the 50s, 60s and 70s, that experience of, you know, being a minority community, discrimination and all of those things. So I think that's probably the main things to think about as opposed to something specific to being Muslim.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
So if you know, if you're all right for time, Salim, another really interesting question.
Yeah.
Should we as volunteers be sort of looking out for signs of mental distress, and what sorts of things would we be picking up on, I guess?
So I think, you know, you'd probably the markers would be the same as for anyone, you know. So people becoming withdrawn, people isolating themselves, you know. I think there's particularly, and I think this is particularly across the developing world, where understanding and particularly acceptance of mental health or mental distress is less, that people may express, you know, physical complaints or something like that. Talk about feeling hot, talk about headaches, you know, and I don't think that's something specific to probably to any part of the world. It's something, you know, more specific, I think, across developing countries or developing those different communities. So I think that would be another marker. Yeah, and I think, yeah, just otherwise your normal things about distress, but I guess bear in mind that people might bring something small to you that is more acceptable to talk about. So they might talk about some practical problem that they're having or something, but actually they're wanting to express to you their distress, but don't have the experience of doing that, or don't have the language for it. So yeah, I think just your normal markers of sitting with somebody and seeing that they're not comfortable and that they're in distress. Yeah, I think for people from Muslim backgrounds, I think the gender issue is something to maybe bear in mind a little bit more than you might, in that, you know, for particularly for Muslim women, and again, I hope I'm not, people don't feel I'm speaking out of turn, but I think, yeah, for a lot of Muslim women, that might be even more uncomfortable talking to a man. I saw a very interesting description in Morocco about how that with equality legislation coming in Morocco, it's actually meaning that women have less of a voice, because your female only spaces that were actually a big part of culture, where you had public baths and different venues that were female only, that actually empowered women, removing them and saying, actually, we're going to have venues that are open to everybody and they're not gender based, has meant that has in many cases meant that women have felt less able to speak up. So I think that it's something to bear in mind, that particularly for women may be much more comfortable with a female worker. So I think that's probably relevant.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask one now. When we do the training, and when we've received training, one of the statements we're given about Syria, and particularly Syria, and about mental health, is that there are, you know, even before the war, there were only 2 psychiatric hospitals in Syria. So this is told to us as a sort of example of how kind of mental health and psychiatry are kind of a bit of a stigma and not kind of something that's talked about. I suppose, just, you know, hearing you talk about the history and the background, could one also interpret that as meaning, well, actually, we don't put people in hospital. We do that thing that everybody says is a good thing, which is sort of support people within our communities, or is it?
Yeah,
just...
yeah. So this is one of those classic cases of statistics, isn't it? It depends what story you want to tell. So I've equally seen that presented so many times, Linda, when they're talking about India, saying, oh, but all the care is within families, you know, and how great it is compared to us in England, where we scoop people off to hospital or whatever. And there's a truth to that, but there's also the truth that a lot of that's hidden, you know. So you know, again, I've often thought about that for people with learning disabilities. Again, we talk about community services in England, and then people say, oh, but look, in these other countries, isn't it great? It's all done within the family. Well, yes, but in some cases, within the family means the person's just hidden away, or, you know, kept in a room somewhere and not out, and, you know, other people don't know of the existence of the fact that a family has a child with a disability or something like that. So it depends what story you want to tell. I guess, you know, I think that narrative, so, you know, when I was talking within a mental health meeting, I really wanted to make the point that the sort of first psychiatric hospital in the world was in Baghdad. So it was an Islamic hospital. It was built by Islamic scholars, and that would have been the first in the world. But certainly what's happened since then is, for different reasons, cultural, economic, and things like that, that health services are developed in different ways. And again, globally, mental health is hugely stigmatized, and the less educated communities are, the less affluent communities are, that stigmatization expresses itself differently. So I think, yeah, absolutely, there's huge swathes of the world, and probably large parts of Syria where mental illness will be hugely stigmatizing, and yeah, seen as a personal defect or something, which again, it's not that we have developed so massively ahead of that anywhere else, but yeah, I think I'm sure it is an issue.
Oh, we've got a nice long question here. I'm just going to remind you, Salim, before people joined us, you did say that you would share your email address in case people had further questions. So whether you could pop that in the
Yeah,
chat.
yeah, of course, yeah.
So we've got a question here. There's a suggestion that people from a BME background are more likely to face being given more serious mental health diagnoses. And is that the same for people from a Muslim background? Do you think support around mental health has better outcomes for Muslim people when delivered by people from a similar background?
So
yes, it's about the types of diagnosis that people are given. Is there a cultural bias there? And then in terms of the support that people are given,
the diagnosis wise, yes, there is a cultural bias. I think evidence against that's irrefutable. If you present with the same symptoms and you're a black man, you're much more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and if you're a white lady, you're much more likely to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, even though you've got the same symptoms. So absolutely, there's certainly a cultural bias. Whether that's different from one community to another, I'm not sure, because most of the research has been done based on racial origin. And so I don't know if that's different in terms of faith. But what we also know is that in terms of Muslim faith is the interaction with that and something like the PREVENT program. So I'm sure there probably is. I don't know how much it's been looked into it and in what specific ways it would express itself, but certainly, Muslim people are disproportionately affected by different policing and its interaction with health. So yeah, absolutely. Better outcomes. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not sure. Again, my guess is that nobody's looked at that. Instinctively, I'd probably think yes, but I'm not sure, and I'm sure it depends upon that individual. But certainly, I'm sure that there'll be a lot of people. Again, not this would be of any faith, when if they were experiencing some issue with their health, and that's even more so when it's mental health, even more so when it's psychological distress or well-being, that they will try and make sense of that looking at their faith. And I'm sure that would be true for Muslim people as well. And so being able to have that conversation, possibly would lead you to better outcomes. I don't know really of any of many services that are offering that within the NHS. I know that there's sort of nationally, there's a network of Muslim counsellors who try and bring those ideas together a little bit. And I don't particularly know of people asking for it either. So I've not had an experience where people have asked specifically, could I have a Muslim doctor, for example? I don't know that it's been looked at, but it makes sense to me that, of course, people would look at things through the lens of their faith and try and use that to make sense of things. Not sure if that answers the question, though.
It's just, yeah, you've given us so much to think about, Salim. It's been very meaty and a lot of information. I was jotting stuff down. The other messages that come through are just the various people who've had to leave, and just saying thank you very much. That was really helpful, really interesting,
Thank
really
you.
informative, which I would absolutely echo. Well, I guess unless anybody's got anything else to say or any more questions, I think it's after 9 o'clock even, so we've really had our money's worth, I think. It's just fantastic.
Thank you everyone for listening.
very much. We'll all do a, a virtual clap.
Thank you. And I put my email in the chat, so please feel free to get in touch or via Twitter at Salim Razak.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.